Hello, everybody, and welcome back to This Week in Privacy, our weekly series where we cover the latest updates with what we're working on in the Privacy Guides community, and this week's top stories in the data privacy and cybersecurity space. If you're new to Privacy Guides is a non-profit which researches and shares privacy-related information, and we also facilitate a community on our forum and matrix, where people can ask questions and get advice about staying private online and preserving their digital rights. But before we dive into this week's show, here's a rundown of what we'll be covering this week. Firstly, we'll start by covering site updates. Then we'll discuss the top stories in data privacy and cybersecurity. Then we'll explore some trending posts on the Privacy Guides forum. And finally, we'll answer viewer questions. And if you do have any questions for us, please leave a comment in the forum thread or on the YouTube chat. But I guess let's cover things off first by starting with site updates. And I'm here with Jonah, what have you been working on this week?
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, lots of stuff going on behind the scenes here. Our wonderful staff writer M just published a new article a few days ago about covering the topic of privacy washing, is what she called it. And it's basically the whole concept of all these companies who are kind of promoting themselves with um, privacy respecting marketing and that sort of thing when they're really not privacy respecting behind the scenes. It's a really interesting article, and a good topic to kind of be aware of when you're evaluating the marketing claims of all these companies. So if you didn't get a chance to check it out, I would definitely uh, find the article section on our site and give it a read because it's a really great article. I know that in the future, she's also planning on a follow-up that kind of covers some of the red flags that you see with a lot of these companies in more detail. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, that's a really great article that came out. I know I have to give a shout out to Kevin on our team as well, who does kind of our community and news stuff. He's been doing some great work with this show, putting together all of our like the news stuff with you, Jordan. The stuff that we're going to be talking about this week. He does a lot uh, of keeping track of all of that for us, and he's also doing a great job on our forum, keeping up with discussions. There's been a lot of great discussions on our forum this week, so um, good time to be a part of the community and check that out. I've been working kind of more behind the scenes on some updates for the site to get it working in offline mode, so you can download the site and read it with apps like Kiwix, which is a big app for reading stuff offline. I know that M has written some Mastodon posts about it. I don't think we've covered it on our blog yet, but maybe we should in the future about how you can download sites like Wikipedia and other knowledge bases and informational sites to that app to have kind of a local copy of all of that. And we are working on kind of developing that system for our website releases that'll be available to download in the future. So that's some cool stuff there. Otherwise, a lot more of the usual stuff. Just keeping up with forum updates. There's been a lot of discussions and about ways that we should head with our recommendations that we'll probably talk a bit more about during the show and then throughout the week in the community. So lots of stuff on the forum to keep up with. But I think that kind of covers all the stuff on my side of things a bit. How about you, Jordan? What kind of video stuff have you been working on this week?
So I guess we'll kind of go off here and say that last week we did have a video go up, and that was the one about age verification that I kind of wanted to have that come out like as quickly as possible. So we had that come out, and I've basically been doing a little bit of admin stuff, just like trying to get, I don't know if anyone noticed, but we have a new intro for the This Week in Privacy live stream. I don't know if anyone noticed, but yeah, that's a new update. And also we've just been, there was some extra stuff I was doing on like branding stuff. But there's also another video that I'm working on that should be out next week, which is about kind of a like fundamental video, I guess, about why privacy matters. So that's like sort of a video you can share with people you care about to like explain why you are so passionate about this. Um, And I thought that was kind of an important article, I mean, sorry, an important video to put out just so that we've got like a fundamentals sort of video. Um, and then there's also the browser fingerprinting video, which is coming soon. I know I keep saying that, but it's coming soon. And that's also going to be quite a big one, I think. Um, but that kind of covers like what I've been working on. Not a huge amount, but just kind of catching up from last week and getting that new video ready for next week. We've also
Sweet.
been testing some YouTube shorts. So I don't know if anyone's been watching those, but they've been doing pretty well. So that's also been like another experimental form of media that we're trying to break into. And I think it's going to be interesting. I'm also working with Kevin, who's basically our like privacy guides like community intern. So we're also working on like more original short form content. So I think it's going to be very very interesting. We've got a lot of new stuff coming. So I'm also excited for the offline access to privacy guides website. That I didn't know that was happening, so that's awesome. Um, but yeah, I think we've kind of covered on the site updates sort of area. So I guess we can move into the news this week. So why don't I just hand it off to you, Jonah, and let's cover off this first opening story this week.
Yeah, so our first story comes, this was published on the Tuda blog, but it's kind of an overarching story we've seen. Their headline is Chat Control is back, and we've got 2 months to stop the EU CSAM scanning plans. So they say the EU regulation to prevent and combat child sexual abuse, first published in May 2022, has become the most criticized law of all time. Here's how to stop it now. So kind of the gist of what a lot of companies, including Tuda, are calling for in the privacy space is for people in the EU to contact their legislators and fight back against this bill because it doesn't do what it says on its face. While they purport to like pr- uh, want to implement this law for safety reasons. What this is doing in reality is granting immense surveillance and censorship powers to EU governments, and it completely breaks very common and very important security measures in messengers like end-to-end encryption, in Signal, and other security technologies that these messengers rely on. So uh, yeah, it's a topic that has come up again and again in the privacy community. Like this chat control thing, it keeps failing and they keep reintroducing it with not many significant changes because I think a lot of people in these governments are just kind of hoping they can get it pushed through. But at the end of the day, it's a very dangerous law that is going to undermine a lot of the security principles and privacy practices that people on the internet rely on. So, I don't know. Have you given any look to this topic this week, Jordan? Do you have any thoughts?
I know we kind of like sort of discussed this behind the scenes, but I think that the most important thing that people are doing here is this isn't actually being this is being considered by the EU Council. So right now there's like a big push towards getting people to um, contact their politicians, and that's because there's a lot of countries that right now are actually undecided on whether they want to support this or not. So I think that it's sort of like, I don't know, um, tricky because it feels like a lot of like politicians are sort of behind on this sort of thing. They don't really understand like the implications. Like you said, this is like this is censorship. Like this is quite a big concern for people, and at least as I understand, this was already blocked before in 2022, and now it's back. So it's quite concerning that like they've decided to bring it back and they want to try and push it through again. Um, but as far as I understand from reading Tudor's blog post, the current government in Germany is actually in support of chat control. So if you live in Germany, definitely like visit this blog post by Tutor and try and see if you can find out who your representative is and get in contact, because um, we don't really want this to pass. And I know that like there's a lot of services that we rely on that are based in Europe, and this law will affect them. So we need to be very, very careful and make sure that this doesn't get through, because, you know, we are in a position where basically a lot of services that we rely on might be compromised by this law.
Absolutely. And the technology landscape has really changed significantly, even compared to a few years ago when this law was being introduced for the first time. Now with the prevalence of like AI, image recognition, and text, and all this AI stuff that we've talked a lot about on the show. Um, the new version of this chat control law that they're introducing in the EU, as Tuda points out in this blog post, is actually worse than the original one because they are expanding on it a bit because of the capabilities that they know AI now has to do this kind of message scanning. So one of the things that they point out, I'll just quote their blog post, is that law enforcement all over Europe are going to be able to compel online communication providers to scan for unknown content using AI instead of just known illegal material. So this is even a step beyond the original proposal, which would have been mandatory scanning against like a known database of illegal images. And now we're going into kind of a realm where the EU expects service providers and messenger apps and people to just put all of their trust in AI determining what content is illegal or not, even though that has never been reviewed by a person at all. And of course, that system can be abused. There's all sorts of research out there about how to fool these AI image scanners into thinking that something is in an image when it's not, and then it's also just extremely unreliable. It's going to let a lot of harmful material slip through the cracks, and it's also going to, on the other hand, it's going to um, flag a lot of perfectly legitimate material as a false positive and as illegal content. So it's a very dangerous situation, I think, that we're getting into, and the people will call this like a slippery slope argument, but we've seen it kind of play out in similar areas before, where like once we create this power to add a backdoor or scan things on the client side or what have you to scan for this so-called illegal content, it's fine if you want to just stop like totally illegal content, but then it gets into like what's illegal in other countries. Some countries like it like, the range of what's illegal is, I in certain countries is far beyond, like, what most people would expect to be illegal, and would wanna be flagged on their phones, and so we're just kind of getting to the point where, like, things can just be added on to these scanning systems, and things will, um a and it more and more until we get to the point where pretty much all messages are being flagged for human review or for, some sort of additional scanning or whatever, which completely, um, it endangers all sorts of communication. So, yeah, this addition of AI stuff, I would say, in chat control is very dangerous, and I think at the end of the day, if you are in the EU, this is the time to kind of make your voice heard because if this does become implemented, this is going to be a huge barrier to having any sort of security and privacy on the internet in the EU, and it'll be a huge political issue to get involved with. So nip it in the bud early, I would definitely say, because it's not looking good.
Yeah, I think this is pretty, like you said, it's very concerning, and it's not really going to be an effective way of protecting children. So I guess like the big thing that we kind of talked about behind the scenes was there's this website and it's called Fight Chat Control. So definitely visit that website. It's fightchatcontrol.eu. And basically, this website has basically all the member states of the European Union and whether they support chat control. So if you do live in the EU and you are against this, which you should be, because it's very bad. It's not going to be great for anyone's privacy, and it's not going to help children. So I think you should definitely visit this website, check out whether your state, whether your country supports this, and there's also a link to contact your MEP. I'm not sure what that is. But I think that's just like your person that represents your area. So definitely check that out. And it gives you access to people's email addresses and their phone number. So if your representative is listed here and they're actually unknown or in support of, then definitely make sure you make your voice heard and tell them why this is bad, because politicians, they're not really cybersecurity experts, they're not really privacy experts. They're just people who are, in politics, and that's sort of where we need to break through to these people. So if you do live in the EU, definitely check it out. I'll just say it one more time: fightchatcontrol.eu. Go check it out. And with that being said, let's move on to the next story here, which has kind of been doing the rounds recently, and that is DOM-based extension clickjacking. Your password manager data at risk. So, if you don't know, there was recently a pretty large hacker conference called DEF CON that happened, and basically there was some security research that was presented during that event, and this was kind of one of the biggest I guess security issues that was brought up. And basically, this person was describing a new attack technique where they were able to access the data of password managers. And it's very interesting, actually. I was reading this before we started the stream. But basically, you can use like a iframe to basically steal someone's credentials. Let me just find the image here. Jonah, I feel like you're definitely more of a technical person, so could you maybe explain this a little bit for people that might want to understand how it works?
Yeah, so basically the scope of this of vulnerability is that an attacker can craft a website in such a way to kind of potentially steal your credentials based on your password manager's autofill settings, so they can basically trick it into autofilling and kind of taking that information in certain circumstances. Um, I've kind of a mixed take on this because it's definitely a very sensational headline in a big topic, and a lot of people have been talking about it because if you read this and you read the headline, it sounds very serious, and it is. It's a problem, but this is also the sort of thing where, like, if you have been covering this news for years, it isn't actually new, and I've seen pretty much the same story with autofill things come up every year for for the last few years. I know a few years ago we talked about Bitwarden having a severe vulnerability with their browser extension, which was essentially a very similar problem to this. Because at the end of the day, um, this is kind of a risk that you are going to take with any password manager if you have autofill enabled. It's a convenience feature, and it's not perfect. And the nature of it is that it's never perfect because autofill means that you're not manually checking every time your credentials are entered, which presents the possibility for a leak. So, while like new ways to discover that information are interesting to find out about, and that it's good people are doing this research, at the end of the day, I'm not sure how much of an impact this will make on a lot of people personally because um, like, if you have a very serious need for security, uh, the password manager browser extension and the autofill functionality, probably isn't something you should be using in the first place. We've covered that before, where it is certainly a trade-off between security and convenience here. And, um, on the other hand, like, if you are using a password manager browser extension and autofill, you're probably not going to be impacted by this. We'll see how, like, how widespread this is, but I haven't really seen this sort of thing in the wild impacting users. It could be incorporated into part of like a phishing campaign. And if you are concerned about it, you should definitely check your autofill settings. I know some password managers like password, for example, have begun like uh they've added an optional setting where you can have it prompt you before you autofill just in case. And hopefully password managers do fix this specific issue. But at the end of the day, I think that as long as you're using autofill, there is some security risk like this. So this hopefully isn't hugely breaking news to a lot of people who are kind of following the security of this. Um, I don't want to completely downplay it, but I don't know if it's like it's not new, is what I'm saying. That's what I would make clear to people.
Yeah, it definitely feels like this has sort of been like caught on by like, oh my goodness, 45 million people have their passwords like could be like compromised by this attack.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, it is possible, but like how likely is this, I guess, to happen? It's a phishing attack. So I mean, firstly you'd have to like navigate to a website that's malicious, which I don't know, that seems somewhat unlikely, especially if you like type in the address or have it in a bookmark. Um, but I mean, I just saw that 1Password did just roll out an update, and now it says you can now choose to have 1Password ask before it autofills logins, credit cards, or other non-credential items in your browser. So if you do want to enable that, if you want to enable that, that is now in the settings and security panel in 1Password. I know that the other password managers that we recommend have also like made comments about this. Um, it was quite interesting seeing the discussion on the forum about this whole thing, because there was some concern about like, you know, are companies uh, taking this seriously? Because like you said, it's already kind of like a thing we've known about for quite a while now. It's not been like the biggest, uh, I guess, issue before, but suddenly now that there's a bunch of like stuff and a massive talk at the DEF CON conference, it's like become quite a big thing. So I think it's kind of like what you said. People need to keep this in perspective. It's sort of not particularly like of an issue, I would say, for most people, but I think people should, if you have a concern, you know, make sure you're using multi-factor security. Specifically, like I think UB keys and stuff won't be affected by this because it requires an actual like intervention by you pressing the UB key. Um, and you know, make sure you're visiting like trusted websites that don't like have phishing links, so bookmark websites that you know what they actually are. But yeah, that's sort of what I would take away from this. Do you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, even stuff like passkeys in your password manager are going to be very well protected against this sort of thing because passkeys have like very strict limitations on like what domains they can be used on. So that is an option. You should definitely be switching to passkeys. We've talked about that before. It's possible. I think it's another. This is a good example of a case where it does definitely make sense to keep your 2FA like codes separate from your password manager because you can maybe prevent those from being autofilled if you do like to use autofill, but then you have your code on a separate device. If that doesn't get autofilled, that can potentially mitigate this risk if you are concerned about that. And if you are concerned about this, definitely disable autofill. I think that that would be the easiest answer to mitigate this for most people in your password manager. But if you're not super concerned about this, I wouldn't say it's a necessity either. It's just something to keep in mind, and you should really decide what you want your settings to be based on your threat model. But I think there's a lot of options here for people who um, want to mitigate this risk on their end.
And I'd also say if you're interested in this, I would definitely check out the article because it is extremely interesting and there's some really good GIFs on the website that like show exactly how this attack works. Because I feel like you can kind of get into the weeds about like how this works, like how exactly it operates, but they've got like this system where they can show with like 50% opacity what's happening behind the scenes. And I think it's very, very interesting to have a look at that. So definitely check out this article. Um, it's from Marek Toth. who created this article, so definitely check it out. It was a presentation at DEF CON, like the research was presented at DEF CON, so definitely a really interesting article to check out and to be aware of. Um, but yeah, what else? What other stories do we have to cover this week?
Yeah, our next story, let's see, comes from the Register here. It's Google yet to take down screenshot grabbing Chrome VPN extension. So this says researcher claims extension didn't start out by exfiltrating info, while says its actions are compliant. But basically, this article is warning about a Chrome extension called freevpn.1, which just the name of that kind of is a red flag to me already. But it is, I guess, a verified Chrome extension with over 100,000 downloads, which was caught taking screenshots of websites that their users visited and then uploading them to a remote server. The developers of this extension claim that this feature only triggers when using suspicious domains, whatever, however they define that. And however, the security researchers who were talking about this extension discovered that the feature actually activates on safe domains and even websites like google.com, which certainly most people wouldn't consider malicious. Bad for privacy maybe, but not a malicious site that should be kept track of by these security extensions. Despite all of this, FreeVPN.1, at least at the time that we wrote this, hasn't been removed from the Chrome Web Store, so it is probably still up there. Um, so yeah, it's another case of malware in these extension stores. We've talked about similar stuff in the past, but I think it just really goes to show how much you cannot rely on like that verification process, especially on the Google Chrome Web Store. I think that they have been burned by this multiple times where they really just let anything fly except for legitimate tools like ad blockers. So yeah, not great stuff from Chrome. Did you notice anything that I missed in this article?
Yes, actually. So I don't know if you remember, but like there was a story that was kind of similar to this. I think it was like some services were requiring people to use two-factor authentication, and basically a bunch of scam two-factor authentication apps became like the top listing in the App Store.
Hmm.
And the UK Safety Online Safety Act, it feels like it's doing the exact same thing. We're seeing like sus VPNs because people want to get around the restrictions, right? So there's like these sus VPN extensions, VPN apps. I feel like we're going to see more of this in the coming weeks because people are trying to like avoid these restrictions, and also people are kind of, I don't know, they don't want to spend money. So these sort of extensions where they offer like a free way to bypass restrictions, we're going to see more of this. They do actually mention in the article, like they say the report into free VPN one extension comes amid a surge of interest in VPNs, so following the introduction of the UK's Online Safety Act. So I feel like this is sort of a thing we're going to see more of, unfortunately. And I don't know if you mentioned, but like the extension that they were talking about had over 100,000 verified installations. Like that is a ridiculous amount of people installing it. So
Yeah.
I mean, no one in our community is using this, I hope. But uh, yeah, be very careful with extensions, especially from like anywhere. Like, there was a couple of other stories I saw this week about like VS Code extensions, and like any extension, don't install willy-nilly. Just make sure you're actually installing ones from trusted developers, not just like loading up your browser with a bunch of random stuff. So that kind of isn't really it's not really a specific case to this certain extension. You shouldn't be installing extensions at all if you can avoid it. Obviously, we do recommend some specific ones, like an autofill extension for your password manager. If you know what the risks are, like we talked about earlier, is definitely a good choice. And uBlock Origin, obviously, you're going to want to have that. But don't install like a VPN extension or like some extension that does a minor change to your browser, because you're just giving access to that extension that could be, while it may not be malicious right now, there's a chance that it can be in the future. So that's like this article said. It basically was like completely, uh, what do you call it? Like sitting there and just not doing anything malicious, and then it suddenly became malicious. So be very careful.
Yeah.
Don't install extensions like this.
And we see that with extensions in the past. I don't know if that was the case for this one, because in this case, the extension developers themselves might be behind this kind of privacy invasion, but we've seen cases in the past where formerly legitimate extensions were are basically like they're sold to these ad companies or tracking companies or whatever, and then they add uh, malicious code to it that kind of is pushed out via the Chrome Web Store as an auto update to all these extensions. So you do definitely want to minimize the amount of extensions that you use because we have seen some of those less reputable extensions being turned into basically Trojan horses to get stuff on your computer. You definitely want to research who's writing these extensions. And I think that's a great point about the UK Online Safety Act because it's exactly like he said. It's really normalizing the idea that people should be, downloading all sorts of sketchy tools to kind of avoid the completely unnecessary and burdensome restrictions that that act is placing on people in the UK and on the internet right now. And it's exactly the same sort of problem that the same act is kind of creating with ID verification. It's normalizing the idea that you should just be giving your ID and personal information to all sorts of websites on the internet, which is, of course, extremely unsafe. So the Online Safety Act normalizing all of these extremely unsafe, dangerous security and privacy practices is a huge problem. And if we see more countries, like the rest of the EU with chat control that we just talked about, if they go in this direction, it's just going to make the internet a far more dangerous and unsafe place than it currently is. And we're going to see a rise in um, malware like this on people's computers. We're going to see a rise in identity theft and all sorts of other problems that are caused by these laws, which really have no practical benefit at the end of the day. So yeah, crazy stuff.
Yeah, it is kind of it's kind of a wild time we're in right now. It feels like all these stories are like interconnecting in some way, which is kind of wild this week. But um honestly, I think let's for the next story, let's choose a positive one here. So this story is about Android. It's from Android Authority, and it's about texting between Android and iPhone could soon get a major security upgrade. So, as many of you might know, the ability to text between Android and iOS has always kind of been like second class, I would say. Oh no, you've got the green bubble. It's like sort of like the iMessage walled garden has stopped people from being able to communicate across platforms. So now we're actually seeing a possible, well, at soon, an upgrade to the security of RCS. So if you don't know what RCS is, that's Rich Communication Services, I believe.
Yes.
And basically, Rich Communication Services currently is available cross-platform from Android to iOS, and it allows you to have, higher resolution images, reactions to messages, all sorts of stuff, all sorts of fun stuff that was originally only available on iMessage and on Android, I suppose. So this is kind of a big thing here, and it's a leak that suggests end-to-end encryption could be coming to RCS messages on iPhones as early as iOS 26. So I believe iOS 26 is set to release in September, I believe. So the code that was found suggests that Apple will be using the MLS protocol, which was introduced by GSMA's Universal Profile 3.0, which basically was developed with Apple's involvement and also Google's involvement. So to basically allow encrypted messaging between platforms.
Yeah, it's cool stuff. RCS. I mean, I think a lot of people will say like you probably just shouldn't be using uh regular text messaging at all when you can use plenty of like internet-based instant messengers that work so much better and they're cross-platform. And in the case of like really good ones like Signal, they're far more secure. But at the same time, adding these security features to apps that people very commonly still use, especially in the US. I know this is far more common than it is in like Europe and Asia, for example. Um, I think that it is a big benefit because it raises the bar kind of for the industry as a whole, and we'll see a lot more messengers adopt this kind of stuff as well when it becomes like a standard and expected thing. So even though RCS is certainly not my top choice for a messenger, and I wouldn't recommend that people use it regularly, it is still good to keep up with, and it's good to see that these changes are being made. Um, because, yeah, it makes a big difference. I think that when it comes to RCS and Apple specifically, it's very likely to me that they will kind of implement the most bare bones possible functionality that they can. So it's good that they're at least adding end-to-end encryption, which I know they were dragging their feet on for a bit when they originally added RCS support in the first place, but I wouldn't expect a lot of other RCS features from Apple unless they kind of get forced into it. It doesn't seem to be a big priority for them. But yeah, it's cool stuff, and I'm glad that they're doing it.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited for this. Mainly because I guess I'll just like put a little bit of an international spin on this. Um, in Europe specifically, like for a long time, there was like charges on SMSs. And that's kind of the reason why WhatsApp is like ridiculously huge. Like basically every business, every person is on WhatsApp. And like one of the big things, the big reasons why it succeeded so much is because there was charges on SMSs. And as far as I'm aware, RCS messaging bypasses SMS charges. It's not actually counted as an SMS. So I think like having this somewhat, I mean, we don't really know what the security aspect of this is. We kind of probably need to do a bit of a deep dive and understand how exactly secure this is, but I'm sure it's more secure than SMS, just plain text. Um, so I think having this extra option for people is kind of huge. And I mean, if the option is like, I don't know, I don't know what it's like in the US. I know like a lot of people use iMessage, but in Australia, unfortunately, like the number one messenger is like Facebook Messenger. So like if you can avoid Facebook Messenger for like using RCS instead, I don't know, that's a win in my book. And even if it doesn't have the greatest security, you're at least having some security compared to like SMS, which is basically just recorded and stored possibly forever. So, um, yeah, it's definitely an interesting story there.
Yeah, SMS, RCS, iMessage, they're all very popular in the US, and I think that the US is kind of an exception in that regard compared to the rest of the world. Um, but yeah, oh, there was something I wanted to say about all of this, but I cannot remember. Oh yeah, sorry. Um, There's there's a lot of privacy concerns with RCS because it's not implemented in the way that people kind of imagine it is. It kind of ties into how you were talking about how RCS messages aren't charged like per message like SMS, for example, because it doesn't really use the same infrastructure. And in theory, RCS is the sort of thing where carriers could kind of self-host it and interoperate with each other, and it is somewhat of a standard that carriers could implement, even though like regular people can't run an RCS server or anything like that. But the truth, the reality of RCS is that pretty much all carriers, at least that I know of, especially in the US, it might be a different case in the EU. I would have to research this a bit more, but pretty much all carriers don't do it themselves. They don't host any RCS stuff. They kind of offload that to Google because Google runs some public servers, and I believe they're free for carriers to use. I'm not entirely sure how the business works, but either way, it kind of goes through Google messaging servers, and so y- it's not as decentralized as people commonly make it out to be. It is kind of my main point. There is definitely a lot of privacy concerns about almost all RCS messaging being centralized on Google's messaging servers rather than with carriers. And I think honestly, it wouldn't be that much better if it was decentralized with carriers either. I think that in most cases it makes sense to just use a non-carrier, non-Google instant messenger. You can get far better privacy and security from so many better options out there. Um, But yeah, end-to-end encryption, it's still always a good thing, even if it's not the greatest service overall.
Yeah, I think like you said, like definitely if you're using RCS right now, look at our website, check out some of the recommendations for like services that you can switch to. There's like a lot better services that aren't centralized on Google. But like you said, I don't know. I feel like I trust Google more than a carrier. Like, I don't know, they seem to be absolutely awful with security. So I mean, at least Google somewhat has their like they're somewhat decent about that. So I don't know. It's kind of like you're picking from like two bad options basically. Like you can choose a much better solution that isn't like, reliant on Google and has somewhat privacy implications.
Well, speaking of phones, here's a story from IT News in Australia. The headline is Travel eSIMs secretly route traffic over Chinese and undisclosed networks. A study. So basically, a Northeastern University research team discovered that most major travel eSIM providers that people use, such as Airlo and Olafly, that one I haven't heard of, but it must be popular. They route traffic through Chinese networking infrastructure. So in one scenario that they tested, an Olafly device that was based in Ireland received a Chinese IP address despite not being in that country. And after disabling GPS on the device, that device would appear as if it was based in China. The research team investigated the requirements to become an eSIM reseller, and they concluded that the barriers to entry in this market for businesses is shockingly low. It basically only requires a valid email address and method of payment to start reselling these eSIMs. These providers, what they get is unrestricted access to things like your IMSI number, and in some cases, device location information that's accurate to within 800 meters, along with the ability to send SMS messages directly to users. Um, so lots of crazy stuff in the eSIM space. Did you catch anything in this story that I didn't cover in that summary quick before I talk about this a bit more?
Yeah, so I guess something that's kind of interesting that I guess some people might not know. Um, so I don't know if anyone here has been to China, but basically everyone kind of thinks that there's this sort of firewall that stops anyone from accessing the internet. But if you actually have an eSIM in China that's like based outside of China, it actually bypasses the firewall. So like this story is kind of interesting because it says like the connection is routed outside the location that you are in. So like that's kind of how that works. Like you're able to access the open internet within China by using an eSIM. So like it kind of makes sense that the opposite could be true too. Like, being outside China and then your data being routed through China, it kind of makes sense. But I thought I'd just add that because I feel like that's kind of an interesting aspect of eSIMs that people aren't entirely aware of.
It's an interesting article. My first thought when I was reading this is that it's an interesting way to kind of gain access to the Chinese internet for people who are maybe interested in researching that kind of thing because it's kind of hard to get a VPN into China. But I think that's a use case that probably most people aren't um, trying to do. And I think that if you're getting an eSIM, you would definitely expect it to go to the nearest servers, at the very least for performance reasons. I can't imagine how bad the performance is going from Ireland to China for all of your internet requests. It seems like a pretty bad setup, but I think that I've heard a lot of bad reports about mobile data performance on these eSIMs before, so it kind of makes sense that this might have been the case in some of those situations. Um, One of our discussion questions for this article, with the iPhone and the Pixel abandoning physical SIM cards entirely, is there a way to privately obtain a travel eSIM without using one of these kind of shady providers that's going to route things through China? Um, and I think that's a great question. I haven't looked into that too much personally. I don't know if you have much to add about that. Maybe,
Yes,
Jordan?
so there is actually a couple options. I mean, not endorsed by privacy guides here, but there's jmp.chat has a um eSIM service where you can basically use like I believe you can use cryptocurrency and also just like a credit card. I'm not sure if it's actually available publicly. I believe it's in beta right now. So that is a way of getting an eSIM. It works globally, which is actually the coolest thing about this sort of like eSIM setup. Like it'll basically connect to the nearest network and just automatically work. JMP.chat is the only one that comes to mind. There's also like kind of an infamous, slightly shady company. It's called Silent Link, but I really haven't heard too much about them, and I believe they only accept like payments in Bitcoin and Monero. So I think you should definitely be careful with that. But it's interesting because there's a lot less like requirements on eSIM providers. Like they don't require you to provide ID or anything like that, because you're not actually getting a number. So that's kind of an interesting side effect to like eSIM sellers. Um, but I think there's definitely a couple of good options. Personally, I'd look at jmp.chat as like the number one, and then Silent Link if you're more interested in like cryptocurrency stuff. But again, like not endorsed by privacy guides, just saying that that's like some options that you could look at.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that a bit more. I had no idea JMP.chat was working on an eSIM thing. That is pretty cool. The whole eSIM situation is very similar to like VPN providers. It seems to be kind of a thing that anyone can just set up, and because it's so easy to do, and there's obviously good profit margins on this, you're going to see a lot of businesses kind of entering this field. I've seen so many advertisements for an eSIM provider that I believe NordVPN is behind on YouTube lately because it's a very similar market and a very similar business model, and it's a very similar set of risks that you have to consider when you're using an eSIM provider. You should take into account all of the things that you would take into account when you're trying to choose a VPN provider. And we have some advice on VPN providers on our site that I think are pretty applicable to this scenario as well. So it's kind of like red flags to look out for and things to keep in mind when you're comparison shopping. But I think really the best thing for this market will probably just be being will be to have some company come out with, like, a good track record and, a good history and a good stance on privacy, and I haven't really seen that from any eSIM providers that I know of, unfortunately, but I think there's certainly room in this market for, um, a company like one of the VPN providers we recommend, for example, like perhaps IVPN or Proton or whoever, or a company similar to them to kind of introduce an eSIM product that is privacy respecting. I think that would be a really great service for someone to provide, and hopefully we see that soon. Um, but yeah, crazy stuff.
I think like probably like the just to like quickly go back on this, like I was looking at the jmp.chat thing. They have this really cool thing called like the eSIM adapter. And basically you can like adapt an eSIM to work in any device that accepts a SIM card. So that's pretty cool. But I
Mm.
mean like yeah, I kind of want to see like a more reputable like big name company like provide an eSIM that, because I feel like you are kind of trusting these sort of I don't know, somewhat fly by night. I mean, JMP.chat's been around for quite a while now and they have like quite a big backing. Um, so I mean, I don't really have an issue with them particularly, but I think like a bigger company also like putting their name in the space could be a lot better. Especially because yeah, there's kind of a need for it. There's not really that many good options. Um, but again, like you said, it's like you're still relying on the cell phone network, which has a lot of privacy concerns. So a VPN is definitely going to help a lot with that. Because you're not bypassing the cell network, you still have to use that. So there's still all the privacy concerns of that. But yeah,
Yeah, I agree. It just depends on what you're doing when you travel. Using a VPN is always, I think, a good idea, especially when you're moving around, and this is no exception.
exactly. Okay, so this is the last article here we've got to cover, and that is from Wired by Matt Burgess. And it is phone searches at the US border hit a record high. United States Custom and Border Protection officials have sweeping powers to search anyone's phone when they are entering the country. including US citizens. Newly released figures show that over the past 3 months, CBP officials have been searching more phones and other devices than ever before. So, according to the article, CBP searched 14,899 devices carried by international travelers. Okay, that they apparently published that on their website. So that's quite concerning. I feel like a lot of times people say that like, the US has like better policies when it comes to like searching people at the border, but I feel like this is quite concerning to hear that there's like quite a lot of people being searched. Um, do you have any like US specific things to add to this, Jonah?
Yeah, no, the policies specifically at the border are very bad in the US, and they have been for quite some time. I know a lot of organizations, especially legal organizations like the EFF, have been talking about this. I know I've seen a lot of talk about how these policies that kind of determine how Border Patrol can check devices and do all of this stuff without a warrant, they kind of expand. It's like a 100-mile radius from the border, basically, and a lot of legal experts believe that that could also apply to, like, being within 100 miles of an airport, which would obviously cover most cities and a lot of the US and a lot of the population. I've never heard of, you know, it's certainly bad that they're ramping this up at the border and checking international passengers. I've never heard of, like, them extending that power to try and do warrantless searches, of people outside of these border control checkpoints and within that 100-mile radius like they potentially legally could, if you follow the exact writing of the law, but we are in kind of a time right now in the US where the government will try and take advantage of every possible, like, legal loophole and specificity, they can, and so I would be, kinda concerned about, the US government taking advantage of that and potentially expanding these searches more broadly in the future in the name of kind of preventing illegal immigration, which is what they are currently really, trying to crack down on. Um, so it's a lot of the same concerns that organizations like the EFF and our community have been talking about for quite some time with these searches, especially when they're applied to U.S. citizens. They're very broad and they don't require any sort of due process or warrant. And so uh, you really have no choice but to kind of submit to these searches if you want to get through the border, which isn't a great situation to be in. So I would say, based on this, it seems to be a very dangerous time, especially for non-US citizens to travel to the US. I think a lot of you can either be detained or deported for refusing a search. Deportation isn't an option if you are a US citizen. If you are a US citizen, like returning to the country, there are legal options for you, so you can refuse, but it will be a gigantic pain and it'd be a huge process to go through. So it isn't really like a viable option for a lot of people either. So I think um, for especially US citizens returning to the US, you have to be very careful about what data you're bringing across the border and potentially like trying to limit that as much as possible or storing all of that on like internet services where you can re-download it after you're in the US and you're past these checkpoints because um, yeah, they have a lot of leeway and not a lot of oversight into how these searches are conducted at the border, specifically in the US. That doesn't really apply to any other law enforcement, so it's not a great situation here.
I guess like the big thing that I've been seeing is like there's been kind of sort of overreach by the US government currently. Like I saw this story about like the US, like the Border Patrol people asking for people's like social media accounts to enter the country or something. Like it feels like this is definitely becoming more of like a issue specifically at the border. But I guess for people that are in the US and who have to travel, who don't really have a choice, is there any specific like things that you can say to people that like they should definitely like what their rights are at the border specifically for like US citizens?
Yeah, we definitely see a lot of these this overstepping into what information they are requesting from you at the border because of what I was mentioning, how like the restrictions on what they can ask for and what they're allowed to do are far less than what they would normally be allowed to do, for as far as domestic law enforcement goes. So I really think it is key to just minimize the data that you have in general, when you're at these places because you have less rights afforded to you at the border at the end of the day. It's not it isn't a perfect situation, and that really is, it's just it's a growing problem. We've seen this for quite a while, in recent years. I know a few years ago, like, scientists from NASA were detained for having, a lot of, like, astronomical data that I believe they thought was, like, encrypted data or something like that. So, uh there isn't really they can really do whatever they want. I would definitely, if you're in the situation, you should minimize the data that you have to kind of avoid any potential problems, and you should avoid the border in general, and you should have a good lawyer, ready and available on your phone so you can give them a call if you have a problem because that might be the situation that you're in at the end of the day. You need to, uh, have some legal protection on your side.
Wow, that is certainly very concerning stuff going on at the border in the US. Um, but I guess, do you have anything more that you wanted to add here, or do you think we can move on to the sort of popular topics on the forum and also answering people's questions?
I think that kinda covers everything I had, for this article.
Awesome. Okay, so let's sort of move into the Q&A section of this stream. And let me just do this. Okay, so we did have some questions already in the live stream. So let's just quickly cover off some of those first, and then we'll move on to the forum questions. So Rockstar Games Dev asked, is Samsung S25 Ultra best phone for privacy against Pegasus spyware? I would say like no phone is like protected against Pegasus spyware. As far as I'm aware, like Pegasus spyware is like actively exploiting 0 days. So like every time they have to use this like software, it's like extremely expensive. And if you're just a random person, I don't think you really need to worry about this sort of spyware. Unless you're like a very high profile individual or like politician or something like this. So in general, I think it's not a huge concern. Are there ways to protect against it? I would say like if you're running like what we recommend, which is Graphene OS, or if you've got an iPhone, you should probably be using lockdown mode, but you know, that's not really a like protection, 100% guarantee you'll be protected against that sort of attack. But yeah, we don't recommend Samsung devices because they don't meet like the high privacy and security standards that we recommend on the website.
Yeah, yeah, definitely not Samsung. They've had a pretty bad track record of security in general. I think it's true, like what you were saying, that you can't like totally prevent this sort of thing. Graphene OS and lockdown mode on iOS, probably in that order, are kind of the best defenses against that on consumer phones right now. Because they because Pegasus will use like these zero-day exploits and exploits that device manufacturers may not know about, kind of limiting your attack surface as much as possible is the best way to defend against Pegasus, and that is something that Graphene OS certainly does, and lockdown mode on iOS does as well. It just kind of limits a lot of features that are commonly exploited to lower the risk of uh, Pegasus, or similar malware from affecting you very significantly. I know that in the past, we've seen like how some forms of Pegasus malware works, and we know that like none of the previous or known versions of it so far have been effective on Graphene OS. I've not heard of that. I've not heard of any cases of it affecting a lockdown mode iOS device either. So I think those are really the only 2, like, commercially available options right now if you are super concerned about this. Um, I think you have a good point. Like, if you're not an activist or a journalist or a member of the government, you might not be super concerned about this because this isn't being used to like steal people's identity or commit fraud or something. It's being used to like surveil very specific targets. And so it's up to you if you're being targeted. But certainly in some countries, I mean, there are a lot of people who might be targeted by this sort of thing. So um, if that is you, I would definitely avoid Samsung and go with one of these other options.
I just want to also add, like, we're talking about 0 days here. Like, these exploits are worth like millions of dollars. Like, if you're not worth attacking, like, that no one is going to use this. They're not going to burn a 0 day exploit on just specifically targeting you. I think a lot of people seem to have a concern around like Pegasus spyware and this sort of thing. It's extremely unlikely. It's very, very uncommon, and it's only really being used against like big political figures like prime ministers of countries, activists, people in like active war zones. So I think, we should try and keep things in perspective here. This is very, very, very uncommon. And I think even if you do have a Samsung phone, they're at least providing 7 years of software updates. I think a lot of times your device being compromised without someone having physical access is pretty low in general. Like a lot of times it requires physical access, and Pegasus is sort of like the exception here. Like it's a sort of a much more like rare and sophisticated attack. So I wouldn't be super worried about this. Not to say that, you shouldn't put in place protections, because a lot of times, using an iPhone in lockdown, using a Graphene OS device, there's really no like uh, convenience lost using those devices. But I don't think it should be a big concern for people personally. But that's how I would go about it.
Yeah, and I think if anyone has like a very specific concern about their own situation, definitely ask on our forum. If you think that's safe and get some advice that's more tailored to you. A lot of people in the community can kind of provide more insight into this sort of thing for very specific scenarios that we might not cover broadly. I do think as general, like broad advice, the vast majority of people are mainly protected by staying up to date with security updates and making sure they don't have an end of life device that they're using. And if you're keeping up with that, your risk is you're ahead of a lot of people, let's just say
Mm,
that, who are maybe not doing that. So your risk is pretty low.
exactly. Yeah, I agree 100%.
I see another comment from Wix logo on here who said it's 3 at night right now. I was working, not going to sleep. I wish future streams happened a bit early. It is tricky because we are such a distributed team at Privacy Guides. Because I'm in the US, Jordan's in Australia, we have people in the EU. We're trying to find like a time where everything lines up, and it's not fantastic for a lot of people we know, but there aren't many better times to kind of do this because it's late in the afternoon here. It's early in the day for Jordan, so we're all over the place.
Yeah, so if you notice that I'm feeling a bit groggy, it's because it's 7 o'clock in the morning right now. Well, 8 o'clock now. But yeah, it's sort of tricky. Like, we can kind of accommodate things to an extent, right? Like, I don't know if we could push this earlier. That would be kind of horrific. So I don't know if that would be a possibility.
Yeah.
I don't know. We can kind of look at the schedule a little bit more. I don't know if that will be possible. We do plan on like bringing on other people from the team to talk. So I don't know if the timing of this stream will change, but we kind of want to keep it at the same time, just so that like, every week we can kind of have people show up at the same time and expect it to be at the same time. It just helps with people remembering that we're doing this. So that's sort of what we can do. I'm not sure if we'll change the timing. So sorry about that, but that's just kind of how it is with the schedules lining up and things. So
Yeah, probably no change. But thanks for tuning in at at 3 at night. If you're still here, maybe you went to bed already. But again, you can also check out this stream after the fact here on YouTube or on PeerTube, and we'll get other listening options as well. And you can also ask questions if you want us to do like a Q&A thing. You can ask it before the stream starts. We post this thread on the forum every Wednesday. So we get like kind of 2 days advance notice for people to post questions, so you can kind of post there anytime you'd like, and then check back the replay afterwards to see if we got to your question. So that'd be my advice if you can't catch us live in the future. But if you are watching now, we appreciate you all.
Yes, 3 a.m. Let's go. Okay, but I guess back to like another question we had in the chat here. Actually, just a comment. Eric said, "Great new intro. Thank you." And then there was another comment from the Real Deal 1989 who said, "Back to VPNs quick. In general, are you guys in favor of Brave's built-in VPN? In brackets, I'm on a free trial." So, as far as I'm aware, Brave uses Guardian VPN as like the
Yeah.
built-in thing, and as far as I'm aware, it actually does install like a WireGuard tunnel onto your system. So it's basically just like a normal VPN, except you control it through the browser. So, uh, we don't recommend Guardian VPN, and there's quite a lot of reasons why we don't recommend other providers. We have pretty strict criteria about that, but I think Jonah wanted to add something there.
Yeah, I don't know much about Guardians specifically. There might be a discussion on our forum that goes into more detail. Generally, I haven't found any VPN providers that meet all of our criteria. So if you look at our VPN criteria and it's not on there, it usually is because it didn't meet one of them, and I'd have to look into which one or more that Guardian didn't meet specifically. What I would say is that, like, in the grand scheme of things, um I do know Guardian has been around for a long time, and it's certainly uh, it it's a scale, right? It's gonna be better than, like, that free VPN.1 extension in the Chrome store that had malware on it that we talked about earlier. It's like it's a legitimate company. There's some protection that's being provided by that, but they're not top of the line, and they're probably not going to, like, defend privacy or, um, protect you as much as the ones that we generally recommend. I would definitely open a forum thread about, Guardian or see if one already exists if you wanna know more about Guardian and Brave VPN, especially because like, that'll kind of trigger us and the volunteer team and the communities to kind of look into it in more detail if you want to know exactly why it isn't a top choice or where it does fall short compared to the ones that we recommend. But if you're looking for a reputable VPN that we have tested up, definitely check out one of the ones on our site because I think they're pretty solid options.
Yeah, I think you really can't go wrong with any of the options that are listed on the website. Like literally any of them, you're gonna be happy. Obviously, like pricing and like specific features are gonna matter here. So I would definitely check out the specific threads on the forum for these providers, and also just read the page, which is privacyguides.org/VPN. So definitely check that out. And just to also recap here, the three that are recommended right now Proton VPN, iVPN, and Molvat. And here you can see on the screen we've got like pretty big criteria here, minimum to qualify and also best case scenarios. So definitely check out the website if you're interested in a VPN, because we do thoroughly vet these sort of things, and the community has quite a lot of say over whether these things should be listed. So definitely check that out.
Canna Bitter asked, do you have any opinions about the Cubic and Monero drama? I'm not a huge Monero guy. Let me get that right off the bat. So, take take that for what it is. But I have read a lot about it. The things that I've been seeing from people who are more in the Monero community, who I would trust, kind of lean towards the opinion that it isn't like a significant problem with Monero that this sort of thing is happening, and it's also not an attack on the Monero network that could be sustained by Cubic. It's one thing to do some big showy computational thing for like a day, but to keep it running for forever, it's extremely expensive and it's very challenging. And from what I've seen, this is all based on, like, what I've seen other people in Monero talking about in the communities, because 'cause I'm not super involved with this myself again, but I do think that Monero in general is responding to all of this pretty well, like they pretty much always have in the face of adversity when it comes to, like, being delisted from exchanges or being attacked by people like this. It really just shows that, like, the things that Monero are working on, are working from a privacy perspective, and it uh, makes it a target for a lot of people, and I think that's a good thing at the end of the day. It's being tested in the real world, and I think that the community is responding to it well from what I've seen. So if anyone who knows a lot more about Monero would like to share more information about that with us, definitely do so on the forum. But from what I've seen, I think it's a good thing, and it is the reason that like Monero is the only cryptocurrency we kind of recommend with the caveat of like if you have to use cryptocurrency at all, it's a good option. But we're not like huge cryptocurrency people either, so there might be something that I've missed. But I think that, honestly, I think real world attacks against these services are good because at the end of the day, you can kind of learn a lot about how a project like Monero responds to them and improves itself over time. And I have seen a lot of like discussion about how things could be improved and like what direction to go in. So I think it's kind of a good thing overall, long term. So I
Yeah.
don't know if you even heard about any of that, Jordan.
Honestly, I'm not really into cryptocurrency stuff, so I
Yeah,
can't really
that's fair.
comment on this, but I think like when we talk about like Monero, like they have time and time again shown that like privacy is the number one concern with their currency. So I mean, I'm honestly not concerned about this. I think if there was issues, then the Monero team would probably fix it. Um, so I don't think this is a huge concern, but again, I'm not really a crypto person. I'm not really in the community with that stuff. Um, Personally, it doesn't interest me, but especially when we just have cash. I mean, I don't know, I just find it so much easier.
Yeah,
But
the original anonymous currency. Yeah, I mean, if anyone is like super involved in Monero and wants to know more about this, another thing we can do, we know a lot of people in like the Monero space, and maybe we can get someone on in a future show to talk about um some of this stuff in more detail. If that would be interesting to anyone, just let us know. It's just an idea. I don't know what we would do exactly, but it's something we could look into if people are uh concerned about this topic and want to know more than what we've shared here. So always open to that sort of feedback.
yes, exactly. Yeah, we're definitely open to having like, more people on the show and stuff. Um, but I think definitely open a thread on the forum, because I think it'd be quite interesting to see what people have to say about it. I guess also just like looking at the forum thread here, we've just got a couple of comments. We're running a little bit long here, so let's just kind of, we're just going to quickly answer these and that'll be closing out the stream. So we got another comment from Johnny Gossamer, who seems to always like posting comments. So thank you for always posting comments. And let's see, what options would we have if chat control actually happens? Will apps like Signal stop providing their service to these countries instead of breaking their software? If so, what can affected private citizens then use or do? And how are they going to enforce the inevitable workarounds tech-savvy users are going to come up with? Interesting. I guess like this is also sort of the problem with chat control is like it's very like non it's very like uh there's no like specific way. I think they've said they're going to enforce it, which is kind of concerning, I guess. Um, but yeah, it's not looking too great. I don't really know what would happen. What do you think, Jonah?
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem with a lot of this like privacy legislative stuff that's being proposed or is even going into operation right now. Um, we're kind of transitioning when that happens from a technical problem to overcome to more of a political problem. And so like right now, if you want privacy, you can certainly do that, and all you have to do is use an end-to-end encrypted messenger like Signal, for example, and that's kind of a technical problem that you can implement to kind of take more control over that. But when things start being mandated, like if chat control mandates that you're not allowed to use any security tools on the off chance that you might be a criminal, um, it's very hard because, there will be ways to circumvent it technically, especially in the short term, like we're seeing with the Online Safety Act right now. It's so many people, downloading those shady free VPNs to bypass this, like we were talking about, it creates its own set of problems, but there will be workarounds for the specific things that chat control monitors, at least in the short term. How they'll enforce that in the long term, like you asked, I really don't know. But if they continue in this direction, it's only going to get more kind of draconian over time, and they're going to try and like control as much as they can about the devices that you use, so that you don't really have a trustworthy way of accessing the internet, which I think is a problem. But, I think, like, when we get to this point, if it is implemented, it really is going to be, a thing that would have to change at a level of, like, your society in the EU. And you have to make political change, and that would be really the only way out of this hole, is for people to get involved and for people to get mad about this because like, that ultimately that controls a lot of your life on the internet, and there's some things that you really can't do without, without being legally allowed to do it, and even if you can, like, bypass it technically, most people won't, and so this danger kind of exists, and it's spread throughout the entire society, and that risk applies to you because if you only communicate with people who can't use, the same secure messaging that you might be able to use, that that poses a problem to your security. So it's creating a very weak link in this chain, basically, all of these laws, and it's gonna be a very bad situation. But unfortunately, I'm not in the EU. I know we have people on the team who are in the EU, and I hope that they can share more thoughts about this in some of our discussions and in some blog posts in the future. So we'll probably try and get more content out about that from people who might have a better perspective on this than me, but I really think that, it's not just a technical problem at this point, especially if this passes. You'll have to step up and do more than that.
Yeah, and I think like the main concern with this chat control system is it's not actually going to affect the apps themselves. It'll actually affect the devices. So a lot of things I've heard is like concerns about, client side scanning, like on the device scanning the material because, the tunnel is encrypted. Like, but the problem is it's going to be a compromise at either end of the tunnel, which is the problem. So even if you don't use a device that has, this sort of scanning built in, it can be a concern for the people on the other end of the tunnel. Um,
Yep.
so I don't know, there's not really a huge plan that they've put forward about how they're going to do this, but there's, the concern of like encrypted apps buckling to this or actually it happening at a device level. So we don't really know what it's going to look like, but it definitely doesn't look positive in any possible outcome is like going to be bad. So it doesn't really matter which way they implement it, it's not going to be able to work without invading your privacy.
Yep. Go to fightchatcontrol.eu now. I mean, this is really the time to make a stand about this and make a big deal about it because asking what to do about it after it passes. It's kind of like asking, what should people in China or North Korea or Russia do to access the free internet? It's like,
Yeah. Well,
I don't know, right? At a certain point, it's really not. You need larger societal change. You can't solve everything with technical problems. I think that that is what a lot of people in technology really want to happen, and it isn't the case in reality at a certain point. It's just not a technical problem to solve.
exactly. Couldn't have said it better myself. I guess with that being said, I'm not really seeing too many more questions here, unless you've seen something or you want to highlight any threads on the forum you thought were interesting, Jonah.
The biggest thing I've seen discussed on the forum, I think, is probably the discussion about the most recent video you published, about age verification and the end of the anonymous internet. I would definitely call out, uh, like, if any of you watching this haven't watched that video yet, you should definitely watch it after the stream because it's a great video. Um, I didn't get a chance to read through that forum discussion, though. I don't know if you read any of the comments on that and noticed anything, but I just wanted to highlight that video because it was very popular in our community, but it wasn't, I don't think it got picked up super well in the YouTube algorithm, so some of you
Hmm.
might have missed it because of how we published it. So, if you did, definitely check it out after this because it's a great watch.
Yeah, it's sort of I think there could have been like some detection from YouTube about the topics in the video that caused it to not really get spread as widely as other videos we've had. We kind of can't, it's hard to control like how YouTube like pushes content, I guess. So sometimes we have videos that we're like, oh, this video is probably not going to be that good, and it ends up doing really well. So it's like kind of tricky. But I think there's this interesting post that Daniel Gray just put in that thread about the video, and it's about kind of this is kind of a situation where like a broken clock is right once whatever, you know what I'm trying to say. Um, 4chan will refuse to pay daily UK fines. Basically, 4chan is saying that they're not gonna require users' age verification to use the website, and they're not gonna pay the fines because they're a US company, and the laws within the US, the constitutional laws don't apply to some random country across the ocean, I guess. But I think it's kind of interesting to see like a company actually, well, not really a company. I don't know what 4chan is exactly. But it's like a message board, I guess. Them taking a stand against this. And I think that like while this website is kind of horrible, there's like an interesting thing here. This is how a lot of companies should be handling this. Like, no, like they shouldn't be buckling to like some like politician in the UK saying that you've got to verify everyone's age, because there are protections, at least in the US, there's quite good protections against this sort of thing. So I don't know. That's just interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer that, like, so many companies won't, stand up to laws like this. I think it just shows that, like, individual action is really kind of needed and needed at a wider scale because you can't expect most companies to do this for you. They a lot of companies have too much to lose by, like, completely saying no to the entire UK market. 4chan obviously does not have much to lose by making these statements, so they're kind of an exception to that rule. But you're not going to see a lot of legitimate companies unless they really have your privacy at heart, threatening to leave. Unfortunately, a lot of them, like even companies that, like, really heavily promote privacy in their marketing, like Apple, for example, they will just disable security features like advanced data protection, rather than, like, leave the market entirely because they can't, uh, take that much of a risk, unfortunately, most companies. And even though that's back now, it kinda demonstrates that, you can't expect other people to stand up for you when it comes to standing against stuff like the Online Safety Act or chat control. You have to at a certain point, you gotta take actions into your own hands.
Yeah, there's definitely got to be some action that people have got to take against this, especially now that there's chat control is like being considered by the EU Council. So definitely go check out fightchatcontrol.eu. And with that being said, I think we are nearing the end of this stream. We've kind of gone on a little bit too long here, but that's okay because there was important topics to cover. So now let's roll out this. So here we go. All the updates from this week in privacy will be shared here on the blog every week. So subscribe with your favorite RSS reader if you want to stay tuned to that. And there's also going to be I'm not sure when this is going to happen, but we've also trying to get the audio podcast released as well. So you can receive this live stream as a audio podcast if you prefer that instead of a video format. So definitely check that out. And also, we wouldn't be able to produce these live streams and also video content and articles and independent privacy content without the support of our members and donators. So if you do value what we're doing here, please consider making a donation on our website. And you can do that by clicking on the heart icon in the top right-hand corner of the website, and you can make a donation using a credit card or cryptocurrency. So if you do value what we're doing here, please consider doing that. And I guess with that being said, we'll catch you next week at the same time. So thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you later.
Sweet. Thanks, everyone.